Talk Politics with Governor Mike Beebe is brought to you by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce and Associated Industries of Arkansas, because business matters. Impact Management Group, Public Relations and Public Affairs, over a decade of issue advocacy success. Connect Arkansas, empowering entrepreneurs and Arkansans through greater utilization of the Internet. And ConwayArkansas.org. Get smart. Visit ConwayArkansas.org and see why Conway is the smart choice for business, education, and more.
Governor, let's get started. First off the bat, I'll have to say I was walking through the Capitol to come in here this morning to set up for this interview, and I saw what looked like some Asian business leaders heading into your office. So maybe you want to give us a little follow-up as to what you were meeting with them about.
No. No, I mean, anytime there are officials from Asian countries who we try to establish relationships with, or who want to come to Arkansas or want to set up businesses in Arkansas, then we accommodate, try to make time. With people in Asian countries, particularly China, Taiwan, Japan, personal interaction is important. Perhaps more so than some European countries in terms of relationship building. And so it's not unusual for a delegation or individuals or officials from any of the Asian countries to be in my office and to visit about potential opportunities, particularly economic development opportunities. That's basically what we talk about.
All right. Well, just to let you know, people are watching.
People are watching. Well, that's a good thing.
All right.
That's a good thing.
We actually got a question from James via email about your China trip recently, asking about, you reported that some companies found some interest in doing business and trading with Arkansas firms. What safeguards or stipulations can be made to ensure that Arkansas monetarily benefits from this trade, that it's not one-sided, I think, is his issue? Yeah,
well, a lot of it's, with regard to trade, is governed internationally and governed by the federal government. And while we want free trade, we really want fair trade. So what we're interested in is ensuring that any tariffs that exist, any obstacles that exist, are equal, that flow both ways, and are not one-sided. This trip, however, even though it had a trade component, had more emphasis on investment and jobs. So what we were really spent the greatest amount of our time on, and the greatest amount of our meetings were concerned, the actual investment of Chinese companies in Arkansas, creating jobs for Arkansans. You know, like we did in Europe. We've had 5 or 6, 7 or 8 companies that are based in Europe, either in France or Germany or Denmark or England, that actually put in manufacturing companies in Arkansas and built plants in Arkansas and have hired thousands of Arkansas workers. The emphasis on the Chinese trip was to do the same thing with Chinese companies coming to Arkansas, building facilities here, and employing Arkansans here. So while the trade component was a part of it, the biggest part of it was actual investment and job creation for our state from the Chinese, much like we've done with the European companies.
You also met, too, with some trade officials in China, and you haven't elaborated much on this, about some issues that might affect Tyson Foods, maybe even Walmart. Doesn't take a great leap of logic to think that might be somewhat poultry related, since China has had some issues with poultry and bringing U.S. products in. Can you comment more on the nature of that discussion? Has it advanced any since your conversations?
I can't comment more specifically, and we have not gotten any feedback in the last 2 weeks that something concrete has occurred. What I can tell you is that I had meetings with both ministers, which is comparable to our cabinet people here in the United States, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Interior, those kind of folks, as well as the Vice Premier, which is comparable to our Vice President. And the meeting with the Vice Premier was extraordinarily, I think, fruitful. I certainly came away from it with very positive feelings. I'm cautiously optimistic, but nothing's happened in the last 2 weeks for me to be able to tell you that the problem's totally resolved.
All right, but you'll let us know when it is.
As soon as they let me know, I'll be happy to tell the world.
I know you had mentioned too, and Grant Tennille, your AEDC director, had mentioned that Walmart is a conversation starter for you guys in economic development talks, particularly overseas. It was in China. Obviously, Walmart has received a black eye in the last week and a half with the scandal involving potential bribery in Mexico. Does that impair that use of them as an asset in starting economic development conversations? And do you have any thoughts related to what has transpired so far in that Walmart story?
Well, I don't think it'll be a hindrance if Walmart acts quickly to fully disclose what their investigation reveals and fully cooperates with any official agency investigations, such as federal government investigations. I think as long as Walmart cooperates with the investigations that are ongoing, as long as they complete their own internal investigation, which I understand they're conducting, and as long as they're disclosed fully the results of that, I think they can weather that storm. Because if something wrong happened, then the worst thing you can do is cover it up. What you need to do is get it out front, find out what happened, take appropriate steps or appropriate action with regard to individuals that were responsible, and then ensure that you've got procedures in place to prevent it from happening again. That's frankly all any company or anybody else can do when they find wrongdoing. And so the investigations are ongoing by both the feds and by Walmart internally, and I suspect that the way they handle it will dictate whether or not it'll be an impediment going forward.
Let's shift total gears here and let's talk about Medicaid. We got a report yesterday from a subcommittee hearing that it looks like a lot of things involving the Medicaid reform efforts that you've been pushing for. There will be some things that will be on track to go to green light on July 1st. Even if you got optimum benefits out of that, all it's going to do is slow the growth rate of Medicaid. It's not going to reduce the amount of money that Medicaid needs. So you've either got to do more in terms of reducing services or raise taxes. Can you speak to that issue of where you might be thinking of going at this point in time?
Well, there's a third alternative here.
Okay.
The third alternative is that you get some degree of natural growth, and a portion of that natural growth can be devoted to Medicaid. So I'm not sure what the route will be. Obviously, it's the kind of thing that you can't do in a vacuum. You have to do with the legislature. You have to do it in consultation with legislative leaders and then ultimately the entire legislative body. Whether it's in cutting some services, whether it's in raising some taxes or revenue devoted specifically to that, or whether it's devoting existing revenue in a greater percentage, particularly some of the growth in revenue, hopefully if it continues, to Medicaid, or combinations of all three of those things. None of that will be done without involvement with the legislature. Almost all of that would require legislative action anyway. And so while I can propose and will, while I accept the responsibility for providing the alternatives and the options and my thoughts, ultimately it'll be a joint exercise between the administration and the legislature as to how we handle that problem. But you make a very good point, Roby, and it's one that continues, that needs to be continually made, and that is all that we're trying to do in payment reform, all that we're trying to do in some of the efficiencies and other things that we've been concentrating on, some of which, as you mentioned, will be ready to roll out by July 1st. All of that's designed to slow the growth. It's not a panacea. It's not a magic wand that's automatically going to remove all the need for Medicaid funding. And it's particularly, I think, and none of this even counts whether or not the federal government does what they're going to do with regard to the federal health care reform, which I've always said was another burden on us if it actually goes through the way it was preliminarily planned. It's not going to happen immediately, but down the line it would cause additional burden on Medicaid. And so I think the people just have to know all the truth and be realistic about the fact that if we can improve what we're doing so that we slow that growth, that's not just removing the entire problem of still having huge Medicaid needs that we don't currently have the revenue to be able to fully fund.
Reduced services still on the table, yes or no?
Oh yeah, that's always an option.
Raising taxes still on the table?
Nobody has come with anything specific about that. Theoretically, it's always an option, but it's not anything that I have planned or that I've heard from the legislature. It is a potential third spoke. If you're really asking me what's likely to happen, I think you're looking at two things. One, some degree of cutbacks in some services, or some rededication of or dedication of some natural growth in our revenue figures toward Medicaid, so that they end up getting more of the existing pie. A lot of that, though, will be dictated by, first of all, what happens in the economy and what happens with our revenue, and secondly, what the needs for adequacy are, which comes first in K through 12.
Do you have any early ideas of what those service cuts could entail?
No, but we would go about that the same way we try to do any major public policy change. We involve the people on the front line. We don't do any of this stuff in a vacuum. You remember what we did with prison reform? We've done it with education reform. We get the actual people, the providers, the recipients, the beneficiaries, doctors, hospitals, home health folks, pharmacists, dentists, all the people that are on the front line of the Medicaid programs, as well as the beneficiaries, as well as the recipients, so that we get them all at a table and we talk about all this stuff. And you got to make hard choices. I mean, unfortunately, there are hard choices in this job, and you don't shy away from that when you run for it. You accept the responsibility. Sometimes you got to make tough, difficult, hard choices. But we don't make them in an ivory tower vacuum without involving the very people that have to implement those policy changes. So I think it's important and essential anytime we do any of this stuff that we include the people on the front line and hash it out with them and take their input. We don't always agree, and nobody always gets their way, but at least you're making decisions that are informed and more pragmatic, more practical.
Does the recent settlement from the AG's office factor into that financial equation?
No. Obviously, if that comes to fruition within, and what we're talking about is not this July 1st. We've managed for the next year. What we're talking about is starting July 1st, 2013 for fiscal 2014 is where the biggest part of the problem is. Now, if the financial settlement, the verdict comes through that you're talking about over $1 billion that the Attorney General won, if that comes through, sure. Does that resolve a lot of problems? Remember now, that's one-time money.
Right.
And so you can plug some temporary gaps with one-time money, but if you plan long-term solutions with one-time money, you're just building yourself into a box. That's how we've avoided the same problems that the other states have had. When they use their stimulus money and their one-time money just to try to keep things afloat, they were just delaying the inevitable. It's bad public policy. I don't mind doing it on a stopgap basis when there's a light at the end of the tunnel with some other means of paying for things. I don't mind using it in a rainy day fashion. One-time money in a rainy day fashion. But you don't plan long-term and sustaining long-term annual obligations with one-time money. And so we're not counting on that. We don't know when or if it'll ever come to fruition. And even if it came to fruition, it's one-time money, and it would just be a stopgap.
This question's from Brent, and it's related to what we're talking about here. Do you believe that the Supreme Court ruling, no matter what it says on the matter of federal health care reform, do you think it's going to be definitive? I mean, do you? And I think the point of this question is, don't you think this debate is just going to be a further debate on the interpretation of the ruling?
Whatever the Supreme Court does, I hope it's definitive. I think the uncertainty and the continued debate, one way or the other, causes people not to go ahead and plan for things that they need to plan for, one way or the other. There is a problem in this country that I think both sides agree to, or all sides agree to, and that is the enormously fast rising cost of health care. It's been the largest percentage, I guess, of increase in our budgets, not just government. I'm talking about in the businesses' budgets and in the families' budgets. The rising cost of health care, the rising cost of their insurance. So it's something that all of us need to get a handle on. We're approaching it in a different way with some of our reforms, which has nothing to do with the health care reform of the federal government. But it I think, illustrates the fact that it's a problem somebody needs to be talking about and piloting different options and solutions to try to get a handle to slow that growth on the cost of health care. I have no idea whether the Supreme Court's going to nibble around the edges and leave a lot of uncertainty for us to continue to debate about, or whether they're going to definitively say it's yes or no on the legislation. I, however, do hope that whatever they do is definitive, because I think it would be it'd be good for the country going forward if we put this debate, decide it one way or the other, and put this and go on to something else and try to figure out how to control these health care costs, which incidentally I thought was what they should have been doing to begin with.
All right. State revenue report's probably coming out tomorrow. Can you give us a sneak preview?
Nope. Yeah, it's pretty good.
All right. So we'll see some positive news tomorrow, perhaps.
But I always got a caveat with that, y'all. I'm pretty conservative about that money, so yes, it looks good, but don't get all nervous yet.
Michael in Little Rock. The Little Rock Veterans Home Chief gets the boot after a state audit turns up some potential overbilling of nursing homes to the tune of $500,000.
Yeah.
Your office requested an audit of this,
yeah.
I suspect, for maybe potential Medicaid fraud or some other abuses there. What's your reaction to this?
No, it's not Medicaid fraud. The administrator the feds changed the rules a couple of years ago, and the administrator didn't change with the rules. And those service veterans with over 70% disability were being charged when they should not have been charged, because the Fed said from and after whatever that date was, I think it was in 2009, you can't be doing that anymore. My reaction is that we got this information from an employee over there, and that's sometimes the best way to get information. In effect, a whistleblower did a good job, for which we're grateful, because apparently nobody caught it within the last year or two, and apparently nobody complained because apparently they didn't know. And so it's a good thing that somebody that was an employee caught it and did know and brought it to some folks' attention, because you see what happened. Employees. Now, you got to be careful. You don't want a disgruntled employee that's just inventing stuff. But you want to be able to encourage honest employees, when they see something wrong, to bring it forward and let them know that action will be taken, and that they will be appreciated for improving whatever their agency's doing.
Okay. Interesting story. Just yesterday, I think we learned that Arkansas colleges, there are more graduates coming out of Arkansas colleges, but we are still not moving up the rankings in terms of how we compare to other states. They're turning out equally more graduates or more graduates. You've got a goal for doubling the graduation rate for 2025. Do you see things moving in the right direction, even though we don't seem to be gaining ground nationally?
Yeah, they're moving in the right direction. They're just not moving in the right direction large enough or fast enough to suit me. The report you're talking about made the very point you're making, and that is that while we've done better and while our graduation percentages have increased, we're still not increasing at the same rate that the national average appears to be increasing. And so you end up not gaining a lot of ground vis-a-vis your sister states. They've just accepted this challenge within the last year or two, and while I'm glad that there's been some progress, I hope they step it up. And even though I won't be around ultimately for that goal, that's no reason for those folks to lose sight of what they ought to be doing. Now, to be fair, this is a whole systemic issue from pre-K on, and the more prepared our students are through high school, through K through 12, the greater opportunity they're going to have to be successful in college. I always said there's two major reasons, there's always exceptions, two major reasons people start college and don't finish. And we're about in the middle of the pack nationally in per capita number of people that go to college. Where we fall down is per capita number of folks that get out with a degree within 6 years. And the two major reasons that they're not successful usually are they run out of money, or they perform poorly academically because they weren't prepared. We're trying to address both of those. The long-term investment for pre-K, the improvement of what we're doing in K through 12 that now ranks us 5th in the nation in public education. Even the one area where there's 6 categories that they use to rank that we come to 5th. We're first in one, second in one. We're 32nd, I think, in scores, raw scores. But even being 32nd in raw scores is better than what it used to be in terms of raw scores. So as we improve our national standing in everything from pre-K to the K through 12, then that tries to address that one issue about academic preparedness for college. The other issue is running out of money, and there's no question that the financial aid increases. We've gone from $20 million in state scholarships to over $120 million, 115, 118 million in scholarship money available, primarily because of the 90-some-odd increase from the lottery.
Right.
So both of the main reasons why kids drop out of college or don't finish or don't graduate are being addressed, but they're not overnight. It's not an overnight panacea in terms of being able to immediately see the results. It's a process, and I'm cautiously optimistic that those things that are in place will improve the graduation rates. But we need to have a lot more per capita number of bachelor's degrees in our workforce, because today's jobs are so much different than yesterday's jobs. You know this. You work in it all the time, requiring a higher and higher skill level, higher and higher level of education, and so hopefully our colleges and universities and our people will meet that challenge. I've challenged them to do that. We'll see what happens.
Representative Nate Bell floated an idea last week about possibly converting lottery scholarships to loans if students don't meet certain requirements to hold those lottery scholarships intact. Do you agree with that?
Oh, no, probably not. I've just peripherally read what he said. I think you got to look at the Constitution, and is that something statutorily you could do in light of the fact that the lottery scholarships were set out in the Constitution? I don't know. I haven't read how much flexibility would exist on that particular point, so I don't know that. But that'd be the first place to start to see if that was even doable. But secondly, punishing folks and making them pay back scholarships because for whatever reason they didn't graduate is pretty drastic, because sometimes they didn't graduate for really good reasons. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they got called to active duty and went to Iraq. Sometimes they had a death in the family. Sometimes they had a tragic accident. If somebody's just goofing off, some sanctions, am I open to looking at that? I'm open to looking at it, but I don't want to knee-jerk on something like that.
We always get a couple partisan questions in here. It's
Sure.
always good for you to get a few of these.
Sure.
This comes from Shane in Maumelle. Do you really think the GOP can take the House and Senate in Arkansas this election cycle?
Can they? Well, anything's possible. Do I think they will? No, I don't think they will. I think, I think there's some geographic shifts that favor the GOP because of geographic movement from traditionally Democratic areas, population-wise, into traditionally Republican areas. But in looking at the districts and at the races, there are really some good Democratic candidates out there that are traditional Arkansas Democrats that appeal to Arkansas voters. I mean, look at me. In the midst of the biggest Republican tide in the history of our state, people were really good to me. People in Arkansas want solutions. They don't want a lot of ideological partisan rhetoric where they don't want us to act like Washington. Now, we got some folks that do on both sides of the aisle. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for Arkansas. And I think some of those folks that do will be punished for it in this election.
All right. And you're not naming names?
No, but I'll be out there trying to do what I can to get rid of some of those folks that I think just vote based on whether they got something beside their name.
All right, particularly...
I'm not bashful.
I understand. Since you're a lame duck, would you consider proposing a constitutional amendment to let voters decide whether the University of Arkansas should play ASU each year in football?
Well, my position on that was the same whether I'm a lame duck or not. I think they ought to play. I've always said I think they ought to play. I think it'd be healthy. I don't think it's the government's place to make them play. I think it's up to the schools. But if you don't need a constitutional amendment to make them play, initiated act. If somebody's trying to start a grassroots movement, they could do that. I don't have any objection to voters voting on anything from that standpoint. I do object to the legislature legislating it. I don't think it's the government's place to make them. I think it's going to happen. I don't know when, whether it's 4 years from now, 10 years from now. Ultimately, I think it's going to happen when it's financially in the best interest of both schools for it to happen. And there's more and more talk about us. They constantly do polls every 2 or 3 years about this issue, and every year for the last 10, it's come back 70% of the people want to see them play. I think it'd be a good idea. Ultimately, the people rule, and ultimately it'll probably happen. But my position's not any different now as a lame duck than it was before I was a lame duck. People ask me that question. There were a lot of folks, scare tactics, that folks said, he be governor, he's going to make them play. Well, first of all, I couldn't make them play. The legislature would have to do that. And secondly, I haven't changed my position. I've always said I think they ought to play, but I'm not going to make them.
You've said before that it gives you a little bit of liberty and freedom to not be running for re-election. You got anything maybe bold that you planning on doing that that you hadn't maybe talked about yet, just because there's not going to be that consequence of having to get beat up in a political campaign about it?
To a large extent, my approach doesn't change. You obviously try to avoid throwing gas on a fire if you've got an election coming up. But in terms of policies, or in terms of what I believe in, or in terms of what I wanted to do, I didn't back away from that even with an opponent. And I think the people rewarded me for that. I think Vic Snyder kept getting elected to Congress when philosophically you heard over and over the majority of his district didn't agree with him. I don't know whether that's true or not, but to the extent that there's any anecdotal information to that, I think it's attributed to the fact that they thought he was honest and straightforward and told you the truth and did what he thought was right, and they rewarded him for it and sent him back year after year. Probably would have sent him back 2 years ago had he not decided to retire. And I think that's instructive of Arkansas voters, and so I tried to do that. I might mollify some of my rhetoric a little bit when there's a race going on. I might try to avoid a controversy that I don't have to stick my nose in when there's a race to come up. But in terms of doing what policy-wise, what I think ought to be done, I don't think I'm any different now than what I was when there were races coming up, and don't plan to change anything. We attack every problem head on. My 2 priorities remain what they always were: education and economic development. And I think by working and concentrating in those areas, we do the greatest thing we can do in terms of improving the quality of life of our people and giving our folks the best chance. Now, there are other ancillary issues. I still want to get rid of the rest of the grocery tax. I've said we're going to do it in a responsible manner as we can afford it. We've got it from 6 down to 1.5. I'm not through. I want to continue to try to get rid of that. I want to stop our payments in the school districts, the 3 Pulaski County school districts, under the theory that, look, we've been doing this for 20-something years. It's worked. Things are better, so we don't need to quit paying. Or, no, it hasn't worked. Things aren't better, and we need to quit paying. Take your choice. You just can't keep doing the same old thing over and over and over and over. You either accomplish your goal or you figure out that it's not accomplishing the goal. But the rest of the state doesn't need to keep paying what they're paying. That's another thing I want to do. I certainly want to get a handle on rising health care costs. Not just for Medicaid, but for our people, for our business people, for our individuals who have individual health care policies. I want to improve our graduation rates in our colleges and universities. Those are major things are not going to change now just because I don't have an opponent or can't have another opponent going forward. They're the same priorities I had from day one, and I think they were good priorities then. They're still good priorities today, and we'll fight every day to try to attack all of them.
All right, you may have talked your way out of this last question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, so you're going to give me an extra 2 or 3 minutes
here.
Your AEDC chief, Grant Tennille, was on our TV program last week and said that he knew that there had to be some restructuring of some economic incentives to appeal more to knowledge-based companies, that the whole paradigm shift that's taking place in economic development right now requires that. Have you had some conversations about what some of those specifics might be?
When he brought that up on your show, I fired him for talking about
it.
No, I mean, he's right. Grant knows what's going on in the world, and he's. I hated to lose him on my personal staff as deputy chief of staff, but he's doing such a great job at AEDC. When we lost Maria, that was the best fit. One of the things you do, the only reason we do incentives is because competition does it.
Right.
If we could do all this without giving a dime away, we do it all without giving a dime away. But if the other 49 states are utilizing some degree of incentives to create competitive advantages on economic development to get jobs, to get companies, factories, high-tech, knowledge-based industries, as you mentioned, then Arkansas has to do the same thing to be competitive, and that's why we've been successful, is because we've been able to do some of that.
Do you see something that another state is doing, though, right now that
no,
you need to bring in?
But this is where I was going with that. we have to view what the other states are doing and what is successful, and then take a page from their book to determine whether or not we've got to make any adjustments accordingly. That's part of Grant's job. He tries to figure out what's going on in some of the other states and his staff, and then model what they're doing and how successful it is, and see if it fits us. And to the extent that it does fit us, see if we include that in any of our packages.